Hello again, everyone. I hope everything's going well for you out there. Today, a little bit of a different video. As you can imagine, over the years, I've been approached by lots of people with all kinds of different ideas, inventions, and adaptations of gun designs. And people are creative and they want to come up with something, and sometimes a new way of doing things, sometimes an entirely new mechanism. And I always am amazed by what people are coming up with. Lately, these 3D printed guns seem to be popular and people are talking about them. I guess this started maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I started seeing things on my desk, different ideas and so forth. And to begin with, I guess the main focus right now is from a public safety point of view, and then there are some some there's some confusion involving freedom of speech and so forth. But as far as public safety goes, I've seen gun designs based on toy guns. And now I'm talking 10 and 15 years ago. Toy guns that were adapted because they have the right shape. If you can get a barrel into them, get a more powerful spring. A lot of them had hammers that were already sufficient to impact a primer. So there's nothing new about guns made out of polymers, and a lot of guns, handguns especially these days, I'm now thinking about the Glock and other striker-fired handguns and others, have polymer frames or lowers, and there are a lot of people that know all about this out there, some of whom may be watching. Anyway, my point is that there are a lot of polymer guns, nothing new there. There are a lot of guns based on what amount to toy concepts or toy designs. So what I thought I would do is, because I had a number of questions that people sent, and there were other questions that people were asking me, and I thought I'd just try to address them and make sense of this 3D gun printing controversy, which really isn't a controversy. From a public safety point of view, it's minimal. And these designs and patterns and things that people share on the web or whatever, I mean, how are you ever going to stop that? I guess you can make everything illegal, and whether that changes what people does is another matter. Anyway, sorry I'm a little bit scattered in my thoughts. It's I have a lot to cover, so I am a little scattered. Anyhow, I'll just read off some of the questions I had. So, are 3D printed guns more lethal than regular guns? No. 3D printed guns are mostly low pressure guns. The ones you might be seeing on the web these days are generally for handgun cartridges. And these guys that are designing the guns are obviously very clever people and know what they're doing, but they can't overcome that you're firing a metallic cartridge in a plastic gun. You might be working with nylon and nylon springs, but in the end, somehow, you have to impact a primer. Now I'm talking about the cartridge. Every cartridge has to have a primer. And cartridges are not made out of polymer. That's been done too. But I'm now talking about conventional cartridges. And the primer is made out of metal. And cartridges get picked up in metal detectors. And in order to fire a round of ammunition, you have to somehow impact that primer. So some of them use nails, some of them use screws. I've seen pins. I've seen, I've seen one clever design that used the spring itself to impact the primer. A lot of the springs are metal, so they would get picked up in metal detectors. But like I said, you can use nylon springs, and those wouldn't be picked up in metal detectors. But usually, whatever it is that's functioning as a firing pin is a metal component, and the cartridge itself is metal. It's brass, it has a metallic primer. Of course, there's powder inside and a bullet. So I don't know. I think the whole thing is kind of a boondoggle with these 3D printed guns. Most of them are single shots. Some of them have revolving cylinders. I've seen some attempts at repeaters, but the materials generally and quickly fail. They're not designed to handle pressure. Handgun cartridges usually operate around, well, just very generally, between 8 and 15,000 pounds per square inch, which sounds like a lot, but for guns, that's not a lot. A 30-06 can be 30, 40, 50,000 psi, depending on whether you're hand loading or using factory rounds. Weatherby rounds are higher pressure than that. Any one of those would completely destroy these 3D printed guns. So I'm probably repeating myself, but I don't think there's any question that we're not looking at anything about involving anarchy or chaos or social disorder because of 3D printed guns. I saw kids make working handguns out of wood, and they used a nail as well. Now the legality of all this, you'll have to explore. I have no idea. People around the earth watch these videos. So what the actual laws are in your different jurisdictions, I don't know. I'm just telling you what I know. So if a kid with a file and a 2x4 can make a working handgun, I'm sure that somebody with a 3D printer and all kinds of filaments will come up with something that can fire a cartridge. But which leads to some other questions I have. So how does a 3D printer make guns? And what materials do 3D printers use? So, I mean, I looked this up. You can too. Polypropylene, polyethylene, carbon fiber, ASA, ABS, styrene, polycarbonate, all kinds of filaments. These machines are just integrated little manufacturing facilities that use different polymers and different combinations of polymers. And I'm probably oversimplifying, probably wrong about a whole bunch of things, and feel free to correct me. But the essence of it is that they just manufacture polymer parts. Do 3D guns have a barrel? Well, yes and no. A lot of them use adapters like this. So this piece would fit inside, or it would be clamped to the front of one of these 3D printed guns, and the cartridge would fit in there, or any cartridge. And a lot of them use these because they can be quite bulky and big and take the pressure of one shot. Then you would take this whole thing out to take this out. And why would they do that? Well, this is a rimmed cartridge. There are all kinds of different cartridges: rimmed, rimless, semi-rimmed, rebated rim. Anyway, a rimmed cartridge is easy to handle. It's got a little rim on it, and it's easy to get it into the adapter, and it would stop at the rim. Getting it out would be another problem, because if you're working with nylon and plastic parts, it may not grab that rim. So why not just take out the whole contraption, which is probably what 2 or 3 of the ones I saw, the prototypes, did exactly that. But I mean, the whole thing is hopeless. This is shaking around inside of a kind of a collar. And getting back to the barrel part, well, this is both the chamber then and the barrel. There's no rifling. You could get rifling in there, but if you're talking about rifling, then you're talking about a metal component. And if you're talking about a metal component, then you've got to somehow get it to bond to the polymer or nylon that you're using. Opens a whole array of other things. The ones that I saw, I would describe as not necessarily tricks, but clever mechanisms that accomplish by way of 3D printing what can easily be accomplished by a whole range of other methods. Going back 20 years, I saw guns made out of epoxy. People made molds. They cast the guns out of epoxy. That's also not a metallic substance. I mentioned I saw the wood ones. I saw the adapted toys. I saw lately, like past 10, 15 years, I saw maybe a half dozen designs on polymer guns, real guns, that were made in factories. And the people took out the metal components and tried to replace them with different polymers. So I mean, all of these experiments and efforts to really, it's a novelty, to really create a gun that may or may not be legal, will probably definitely not work as well as a factory gun. So the whole thing is kind of an adventure, and I involve myself in all kinds of adventures with designs and inventions, so I know the appeal. It's not necessarily a bad thing. can be a dangerous thing. Anyhow, what cartridges do 3D printed guns use? Well, mostly low pressure cartridges. What did I pull out? 38 Smith & Wesson long. 38 Special would be fine. This is a 32 Smith & Wesson long. Any of the low pressure cartridges would be fine. Since there probably isn't a rifled barrel, we're talking about being effective for a matter of feet, but maybe they came up with some way of rifling nylon. But when I say rifling, you have to spin the bullet somehow, because the only thing that leaves the gun, contrary to what a whole bunch of people think, is this, the bullet. This is the cartridge case. This stays in the gun or it gets ejected. The primer is right there. That has to be impacted by something. A lot of them, like I said, use a nail or a pin. How far can 3D guns hit? Somebody asked me. Well, from what I've seen, not very far. And since there's no rifling, mostly the bullets start tumbling right away. So we're talking like 5 or 6 feet. You know, I think you'd be in greater peril with a modern slingshot than some of these adapted 3D things. But again, it could be totally wrong, and maybe people are coming up with fantastic things. Everyone that I examined was big, bulky, almost didn't work or failed on ignition. They couldn't take the pressure. How long do 3D printed guns last? Well, if you don't shoot them, a long time. So that's an answer. Are 3D printed guns accurate? I didn't see any accuracy. I don't think that's the objective. They just are happy to get the thing to go bang. Do 3D printed have safeties? Well, I didn't see any safeties because I mostly they don't go off. But anyway, are 3D printed guns better than regular guns? No. If you had to choose between a black powder gun made in the 1800s and a 3D printed gun, considering accuracy, reliability, durability, which one would you choose? I'll take the 1800s gun right away. And this question is why this flintlock and this percussion gun is on the table. Oh, and before I forget, the reason I was talking about adaptive guns, this is like a really old British brass flare gun. You could probably figure out some way of making it out of polymer, but it's very tough string. You can adapt these to shoot just about anything. They're very strong. So if people are interested in making firearms are not difficult to make. The concepts were mastered a long time ago. This is a Harrington and Richardson starter pistol that you can find in in a lot of places. It's an abbreviated revolving cylinder, and the barrel is blocked. You can see, because it's supposed to shoot a blank. You get a barrel for this, and you get a proper cylinder, or use this one with custom cartridges, and you have a functioning double action revolver. Again, the legality, I have no idea. I've never done this conversion, although I've seen them. This is another signaling or flare device. This would be easy to turn into a firearm, and actually quite a good one. I did a few other things. So there's another question coming up. So anyway, I'd rather take the 1800s gun than any of the printed guns. Polymers are just not designed for pressure. But I did want to mention, like I said, this is a very scattered video, but that there are new technologies. One of them is direct metal laser sintering, and one is atomic diffusion additive manufacturing. Because the industry seems to be using the word printer, even pertaining to those last two systems that I just mentioned, everybody's maybe confused. I really don't view any of this as printing, and I don't view those machines as printers in the normal sense of the word, but I can understand how it evolved. But atomic diffusion additive manufacturing looks, to me, fantastic. You could look that up and see why I think that. How hard is it to make a gun? It's not hard to make a gun. Whether you're making it out of plastic, with a nail, or wood, if somebody passed a law especially in the free world, that there can't be any guns. Any workshop can turn out functional, completely reliable firearms. The hard part is eventually the ammunition, but you could do something about that. And with flintlocks, I have one of those on the table too, you don't have to have a primer. You get around that. And that's why these survivalists, a couple of them I knew over the years, have a wall full of flintlocks, because they'll be the last one. This one doesn't have a primer because you're using flint against steel for ignition. So, and this is from London, whatever it is, 18 something or 17 something. It's a police revolver, a police pistol. You can read that. Anyway, losing my train of thought. So how hard is it to make a gun? Not hard. Can you buy everything you need to make a gun at a home improvement or hardware store? Yes, absolutely. You can walk in, and if you know what you're doing, have the components and build a completely reliable, much better gun than a 3D printed polymer gun in a very short time. Can flare pistols, starter pistols, concrete nailers, or other nail guns be converted into firearms? Yes, it's not that difficult to do. Again, I'm not saying do it or whatever, I'm just answering a question. Is it legal to convert things into guns or make guns at home? Again, because of all the jurisdictions involved in my channel, I have no idea. I would probably say everything's illegal except where it's legal. So are 3D guns undetectable by metal detectors? No. How are you going to ignite that cartridge? Now, people do funny things. So they need a nail or they need a pin, which they have to fumble around with to get into the 3D printed polymer gun. Maybe they take lead foil and try to camouflage the nail, or they try to hide the cartridges inside of other things. But these authorities are 10 times as smart as we are. They've thought of everything, and they've got the machinery and technology to detect what's what. So, I mean, and how do you disguise the shape of something? You can hide it in something, or hide it in a hairdryer, or they've seen all this 1,000 times. They have courses, year-long courses, going through how people can disguise the components of a gun. I don't think you can even take a water pistol through most security systems, like one that has not been modified. Are 3D, okay. Are cartridges used in 3D printed guns undetectable by metal detectors? Well, no. I mean, they're not using special cartridges. They're not using 3D printed polymer cartridges. The cartridges they're using are the same ones that we use in regular firearms. That's why they run into a brick wall. They still have to ignite the primer. They still have a cartridge case and a bullet. So there is no undetectable firearm here. But, I mean, if it makes people feel better, then pass a law and say, make what you want to make, but there has to be a piece of metal in there so it shows up on metal detectors, like another law. Can you fire a primer without a metal object? Well, the simple answer is no. There has to be impact on the primer. As usual, there are exceptions. You could use electricity, creating heat and so forth, but that's a whole other arena. And there have been caseless cartridges and all kinds of other things done, but I'm now talking like basic gun science, and hopefully most of you out there will agree with me and know more than me, and I always assume that other people know more than I do. So that's about it. No need for panic. They've been around for years. Polymer guns are nothing new. I looked at a polymer gun made out of what looked like Bakelite, made in the 1930s, and it had a spring, a hammer. The firing pin was part of the hammer. And I guess you could fiddle around with that thing and get it to fire a cartridge somehow, but why would you? So these are novelty items. The best way to go is just get the legal working factory-made gun like when you go and buy anything else. But it's fun to experiment lawfully and safely, and I guess that's probably all I have to say about these 3D printed guns. And for the lawmakers, well, I'm sure you have better resources than me and my channel, but you know, I see countless things over a long period of time. There's nothing to be alarmed about. There is no anarchy, and these are not undetectable. They're going to pick up these cartridges no matter what. And camouflaging metal parts, they're like flags. They're like flashing lights. You can see what's what. A trained person will detect everything. And mostly, like I said, they don't work. Those nylon springs fail, so then they switch to metal springs. One guy showed me one that actually worked, but then I said, it sounded like a metallic spring to me. He said, no, that's a nylon spring. So I said, anyway, we took it apart. And, you know, I don't blame people for wanting to be successful, but it was a metal spring. He had to take the nylon thing out for the demonstration. So big metal components to be picked up in a big plastic frame that unmistakably looked like a gun. Anyhow, I hope that answers some of your questions. Send more if you like. And I mean, read up on it. It's a fascinating thing. But I encourage everybody to kind of stick with like what makes sense. As exciting as other things are. And I guess if we look at it as kind of a form of entertainment, building things at home, that's another thing. Anyhow, hope I didn't offend anybody, and covered at least some of the science so you can understand what's what. And there's a lot of misinformation about guns out there. But thanks so much for watching, and please subscribe. And like I said, send all your questions. And I also am on Patreon. This is for viewers that take a deeper interest in what I'm doing and want better access to me. So thanks so much, and good luck out there. Take care.